Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Barbados Coalition of Service Industries 2023 Business Forum Series. We're discussing this morning the topic, Air-linking Prosperity, Bridging Trade and Services in the Caribbean and African Region. At this time, I would like to welcome Miss Michelle Smith-Mears, the Executive Director of BCSI, to offer welcome and opening remarks.
The Honorable Carrie Simmons, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade and Senior Minister coordinating the productive sector. Dr. Tricia Tanis, Chairman of the Barbados Private Sector Association. Mr. Neil Walters, Director, Finance and Resource Management, Caribbean Tourism Organization. Mr. Victor Mukete, Associate of Africa Exim Bank. President of the BCSI, Mr. Wendell Cumberbatch, members of the board, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. We welcome and thank you for joining the second event in our BCSI Business Forum series. Today, we're discussing a topic of immense importance, the issue of air-linking and its potential to bridge trade and services in the Caribbean and African region. As we navigate the challenges and opportunities in regional and global commerce, and as we all face challenges with the access and cost of regional and international travel, this discussion couldn't be more relevant and pressing. Air-linking, or the connectivity through air travel, takes us beyond airlift for tourism reasons. It is the lifeblood of international trade and the services sector. It acts as the crucial conduit, facilitating the movement of people, goods, and ideas across borders. Our focus today extends far beyond the mere logistic aspect of air travel. We are here to delve into the ways in which air-linking fosters collaboration, strengthens relationships, and fuels economic growth. The Caribbean and African region share history marked by their rich cultural and historical ties. And yet, despite these deep-rooted connections, there is untapped potential for us to explore the myriad of opportunities that lie in fostering stronger trade and service links between these regions. Whether we speak of tourism, finance, healthcare, education, creative, or any other sector, the potential for mutual benefit is vast. The African region is experiencing tremendous growth and transformation, presenting a wealth of opportunities for exchanges, collaboration, and partnership. By fostering stronger air-linking between these regions, we open doors to innovation, investment, and sustainable economic development. Today's discussions will revolve around the tangible actions that can be taken to facilitate air-linking, harmonize regulatory practices, and bolster the connectivity that is so vital for trade and services. As we explore these issues, we must also consider the critical role of technology, data, and digital platforms, which are reshaping the landscape of services delivery. It is my sincere hope that our deliberations will yield valuable insights and concrete strategies that can be harnessed to enhance the connectivity between the Caribbean and Africa, thus propelling our services and our service industries forward. The challenges we face are significant, but so too are the opportunities. Today, we can harness the power of air-linking to bridge the gap between our regions and build a more prosperous future for all. Again, I want to thank you for your presence here today. I look forward to the fruitful discussions and outcomes that will result from our collaborative efforts. Also, allow me to introduce our moderator today formally. She is Mrs. Amanda Reefer. As well as being a member of the board of the BCSI, she is a deputy dean with responsibility for business development and international partnerships in the UWI Faculty of Sport. She holds a BSc in management with a concentration in marketing and an MSc in international management with a distinction from the University of the West Indies, Barbados. Mrs. Reefer is the architect and the driving force behind the establishment of the first academic sports program at Cave Hill campus, successfully negotiated the first double degree with the University of New Brunswick, Canada, to deliver the MSc in sports science degree at UWI. Ladies and gentlemen, our moderator for today, Mrs. Amanda Reefer.
So much, Ms. Smith-Mears, for the introduction, the welcome. And let me apologize to all of you for the late start. Allow me to just do some housekeeping and go through what the session's format will be this morning. We're going to have, of course, discussion with our esteemed panelists. We are also going to have a question and answer segment, which would allow you all to pose your questions to the panelists so that we can engage in meaningful interaction and discussion. And of course, we'll have our closing statements and remarks at the end. So welcome everyone once again. This is indeed a very important topic, and as we know, the Caribbean and African regions, though we are separated geographically, we share a historical, cultural, and economic ties that we believe present immense potential for economic growth and development. By fostering trade and services between these regions, we can unlock opportunities to promote prosperity and address common problems. The proposed virtual the significance of trade and service between the Caribbean and African regions, highlighting the potential benefits and opportunities, and outlining strategies for collaboration. This discussion will also highlight the critical importance of affordable and efficient airlift to the real success of increased collaboration and trade regionally, as well as between the Caribbean and Africa. Allow me to introduce our panelists for this morning. We're delighted to have you all here, and we know you're all very busy. We start with the Honorable Minister Carrie Simmons, and allow me to also read a brief bio on each of the panelists. The Honorable Carrie Simmons, MP, is an attorney at law and has been called to practice at the Bar of Barbados and the Bar of the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States. Mr. Simmons is, in addition to being a general litigation practitioner, also an international trade law practitioner, and maintained an extensive practice offering consultancy services in this field to a number of member states across the Caribbean region. Additionally, Mr. Simmons has also been retained as legal expert or team leader for a series of CARICOM coordinated and internationally funded trade and competitiveness assessments, which were designed to identify and advise upon the most effective manner of removing restrictions to and impacting upon the movement of services, goods, capital, skills, and rights of establishment in the implementation of the Caribbean single market and economy. In similar vein, Mr. Simmons provided consultancy services to assist in the technical implementation phase of the Economic Partnership Agreement between the European Union and the CARIFORUM member states. Mr. Simmons has now been a member of the Legislature of Barbados for 21 years, having served in both legislative houses. During that time, between the years 2003 and 2008, Mr. Simmons served in the Cabinet of Barbados as Barbados's Minister of State in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade and as a Member of Parliament. Between 2013 and 2015, he served as leader of opposition business in the Parliament of Barbados. And since the 25th of May, 2018, he has been Minister of Tourism and International Transport, Minister of Energy, Small Business and Entrepreneurship, Senior Minister coordinating the productive sector, and Minister of Energy and Business Development. And now, Senior Minister coordinating the productive sector and Minister of Foreign Affairs and Trade in the Government of Barbados. Welcome, Honorable Minister Simmons. We move now to Dr. Tricia Tannis. Dr. Tannis is the chairman of the Barbados Private Sector Association. She was appointed to this position in September 2021. She is the first female to hold the position of chairman of the BPSA. BPSA is the umbrella body of private sector associations, with the chairman being the main voice of the BPSA and main spokesperson representing the private sector within the Social Partnership of Barbados. Currently, the managing director of the Unicoma Barbados Group, she is a performance-driven thought leader in financial management who delivers sustainable results to support the strategic objectives of corporate stakeholders in a socially responsible framework. She promotes a culture of continuous improvement to maintain adaptable and responsive organizations ready for changing market conditions and business demands. Mrs. Tannis is an experienced finance professional with over 20 years of experience in financial management and corporate governance, and was the first female appointed to that office in the Unicoma Caribbean and Latin American Group. Welcome, Mrs. Tannis. We move now to Mr. Victor Mukete, Associate at Afri-Exim Bank. Mr. Mukete is a member of the African Export-Import Bank's Intra-Africa Trade Bank team, where he provides support to the trade, investment, and corporate finance unit. His work involves handling diaspora-focused transactions, trade finance, various types of mergers and acquisitions, as well as specialized finance. Mr. Mukete holds a master's degree in international political economy from King's College in London. He also possesses a bachelor's degree in economics from Royal Holloway University of London. Welcome, Mr. Mukete. And last but not least, Mr. Neil Walters, Director of Finance and Resource Management, Caribbean Tourism Organization. Mr. Walters is the Director of Finance and Resource Management. He is responsible for CTO's financial management and ensuring that the organization's funds are properly utilized. Mr. Walters joined CTO in 2000 and has held the position of Director of Finance and Resource Management since November 2009. He has worked in different areas of accounting in local and international organizations. However, he maintains that to date, this has been his most rewarding job as it allows him to contribute to the development of Caribbean people. Welcome, Mr. Walters, and good morning to all of the panelists. I will now ask each of the panelists, starting with our Honorable Minister, to give just a few remarks regarding the topic as we begin this discussion. Minister Simmons.
Thank you very much, Amanda. I want to welcome this opportunity to interrogate the very interesting question of operations relating to the bridging of trade and services. I suppose that there are a number of things I could say, but if I was to just try to synopsize, the first thing is that I think that there is a significant desirability for us to try to advance the discussions and come to a positive solution with respect to the desirability for airlift between ourselves and Africa. Simply put, it helps us to remove the middle leg. It helps us to remove the middleman and obviously the middle passage. As it presently operates, we invariably reach Africa via a stopover either in New York or United Kingdom. In the case of the United Kingdom, I know from experience that it is 8 hours or so to get there, then 2 or 3 more hours to connect if you're going to connect immediately. And then if another 8 hours, depending on where you're intended to go, Ghana or Kenya, for example, even further if you're going deeper into Africa. And the reality is that you spend the better part of the day, and the hours that I just gave would probably take you to somewhere in the vicinity of 18 to 20 hours in order to get there in the ideal circumstances without delays, etc. With regard to this issue of connections to Africa via airlift, we are obviously beginning at ground zero. But I think that there's some indisputable value in the context of selling our services to Africa, because services really reflect the competitive strength of the regional economy, and in Barbados's case, the Barbados economy specifically. I need not state that which we all know. We're talking about tourism and hospitality services, for example, but the range is far wider in terms of the potential value. I need not tell you, Amanda, because you know the value of our sports services. We also have digital services, cultural products, the creative industries as a whole. And then there are the more traditional things that we have always done well, which are, for example, the professional services of law and accounting and education and health, et cetera, et cetera. I think that in an introductory statement, I should acknowledge upfront that there are substantial challenges to this proposition, and we have been working on resolving some of them, and quite frankly, some have already been resolved. So that, for example, there is a need to identify the best fits. We are currently engaged in discussions with Rwanda Air. We're engaged in discussions with Ethiopia Airlines, Kenya Airways. The ideal fit is what we are still trying to work through, and at some stage, perhaps not in this initial part of the conversation, to go through some of the challenges which relate to finding that best fit. There are obviously technical issues which we had to overcome, some of which, as I just indicated, we have already treated this. So that, for example, there was a need to start the ball rolling by having air services agreements between ourselves and the proposed destinations that we would like to connect with. In the case of Ghana and Kenya, we have already concluded the air services agreements with signatures on both sides and approval by the governments. But an air service agreement is not something you can fly on. So therefore, you need to have obviously the airline, but before the airline can leave the ground, the airplane can leave the ground, there has to be some economic framework, some substance that allows for this effort to make sense. Otherwise, you will have a flight or two and then it will collapse. So that the question of market awareness, especially behind the gateway, and that therefore means dedicating resources now to a new market and seeding that market financially in terms of getting people to understand what the product potentially is in the Caribbean. And equally, what will have to happen is that on the flip side, you have to generate an interest in the Caribbean for travel to the different places in Africa. And of course, that requires a budget dedicated to that purpose. So then, because we are talking about greenfield market, fresh start, there is going to be a need as we build that familiarization process for us to be able to find the resources to subsidize seats. And the possible cost involved in that can be quite substantial. And again, at a later point, I can go into some detail with some of the challenges we've had in that regard. I think more generally, there are some broader issues though, because even as we talk about selling services, we have to recognize that there must be accreditation of the services being offered. And I want to be very candid about this. This is an excellent opportunity for us to have very serious discussions about not only the opportunities, but the strengths and weaknesses of our private enterprise efforts here in Barbados and by extension the Caribbean. we can't sell services professionally easily into Africa or anywhere else without having mutual accreditation being resolved. And the happy truth is that even amongst ourselves in this region, we have failed to satisfactorily deal with the issue of mutual accreditation. So starting a new market, it sounds sexy. It is obviously intellectually appropriate. It is highly desirable. But if we do not do the fundamentals which allow for there to be a regulatory structure, then it makes no sense. There has to be equally a willingness on the part of the private sector and all private enterprise to embrace new opportunities and to enter new marketplaces. And again, the unfortunate truth is that we have tended to be very orthodox in our thinking and very dedicated to pre-existing relationships. And so therefore there is a very strong linkage to the North Atlantic countries, but much less so that we have tried to explore. I think that the other question, of course, has to be that there needs to be a willingness to establish not just in an individual or a company doing services. And I mean, you know, you can say financial services, for example. You point happily to what our BPP, which is now in Ghana, but how many more? And the question therefore has to be the willingness to have a commercial presence off the ground in some of these sectors, and the dedication of human and financial sector that outward threat. And again, there's not a lot of evidence that this is something that we are prepared to do. So broadly speaking, I think there are opportunities. I think that there are obvious challenges, but there's obviously a need for us in this region to have a little bit of soul searching as we look at this matter and try to work through not only where we would ideally like to go, but what we have to do in order to get ourselves there.
Thank you, Minister, so much for those introductory remarks. And rest assured, we will be coming back to you with several questions and a lot more discussion around the points that you made, very, very key points. Thank you so much. We move now to Dr. Tanis, Chairman of the Barbados Private Sector Association. Minister mentioned you know, sometimes the private sector may be risk averse or, you know, opening to new markets. Dr. Tanis, please welcome and please share your opening remarks in this very important topic this morning.
Thank you. Thank you to my fellow panelists. Pleasure being here. As the Minister has very articulately outlined, the opportunities are obvious and endless. You're talking about a market that is 200 times the size of CARICOM markets, and that have extremely advanced competencies in certain key areas that can be easily cross-fertilized. And beyond the trade value, there are other non-economic gains. You know, we can speak to the potential to foster closer cultural ties and you know, renew those diasporic relationships. There's a huge educational research collaboration opportunity, which hopefully, when mined correctly and to its ultimate benefit, can actually result in the improvement of standard of living of persons on both sides, you know, of the Atlantic. And of course, monetizing those opportunities is a key source of focus for us. The challenge, as the Minister has rightly outlined, is that for certain elements of capital investment in the Caribbean, I wouldn't say all, there is definitely a more traditional approach to investment and assessing returns of investment. I think, though, that also presents a fantastic new opportunity, though, particularly with the advent of the Afrexim Bank and the investment that they are making, I think up to $1 billion, soon to be $3 billion in the Caribbean, and essentially opening up the financing option. The opportunity that I see, though, is to create a new brand of capital ownership and a more entrepreneurial brand. I think it will always be more difficult to achieve real incremental growth from the existing owners of capital who no doubt have created a formula that is tried and tested for themselves, but are a lot less nimble and agile, certainly in their thinking. I think the opportunity, though, is a new generation of entrepreneurs which do not have those impediments in terms of their mindset and approach. But let's be also very, very practical. They will need some guidance and some, the opening essentially of the linkages to get there. When we speak very, very strongly about the very practical and physical limitations of air travel and shipping logistics, people have to move from markets to open. I mean, that's fundamental. And typically, it starts with persons moving in their personal spaces and creating opportunities in terms of tourism spaces. Before then, business opportunities tend to actually are forged. Typically, that's the rhythm of how business opportunities arise. Very, very few opportunities are actually forged by businesses going on greenfield, and there are very few persons who do that successfully. Typically, there is more of a non-private sector type engagement, no doubt based on tourism, education, and those types of linkages, diplomatic linkages, and so on, that actually feeds the as a feeder mechanism for the interest in a particular trading market and so on. So I do agree that the opportunities need to be right sized. We do need to target, I believe, a new capital investor. I think the Afrexim Bank essentially has opened up that phenomenally. The ease of doing business and the business facilitation is something that we have to look at very, very, very clearly. For example, Kenya excels in that regard. They have phenomenal business facilitation mechanisms. Rwanda, to some degree, as well. There are lessons to be learned, certainly on our side of the Atlantic, in terms of how we can actually bring ideas to the ground very, very quickly. And certainly if we have the financing backing and the entrepreneurial spirit, essentially businesses can arise greenfield very, very quickly. But we do need for people to start to move. And in so doing, there are certain things we need to look at. We can look at certainly open sky and visa waiver agreements between CARICOM and the African Union, where any impediments for people to move exist. So let's start there, make sure that those impediments are not there before we then start to look at logistics. We do have quite a lot of work to do in terms of the physical logistics as far as moving goods between the two regions, and that is likely to be the most challenging. But Barbados certainly, and above the CARICOM region, certainly have built service-driven economies. Services will tend to move a lot faster, obviously, than goods. And that is where we need to really start looking at those opportunities very, very quickly. So I think they are, in summary, and I thought we'll come back and we'll address most of these issues in a lot more detail over the next couple of hours. But there's no doubt that we need to work very quickly to foster these relationships and to take advantage of what is clearly fantastic economies of scale that probably will be more beneficial to CARICOM than maybe even the African region. And that is why I think the urgency is definitely on our side.
Thank you so much, Dr. Thomas, for those remarks. And definitely move we should and move we must. We will definitely come back to you with some more questions, further insight into the readiness of the private sector and what are some of the support mechanisms we can give them to get them to move, as we say. Thank you so much. And in moving, we move to Mr. Mokete. We heard mention of capital investment and the importance of financing. So welcome, Mr. Mokete, and we invite you to just give some brief remarks on behalf of Afrexim Bank.
Thank you so much. Building on the remarks of the Honorable Minister and my esteemed colleagues, it's important to recognize that this is not a forum just to discuss connectivity and railways, but really an opportunity to discuss connecting people and fostering economic growth and enriching our understanding of one another. It's on that basis that the bank, we don't solely define intra-African trade as trade amongst those on the continent. because we understand that trade on the continent is only at 16%, and it's been that way for the last several years. Compared to trading with the US or with the West and other foreign markets. Now, for us, it's about market expansion, and in that regard, we've extended our definition of intra-African trade to those in the diaspora and anybody of African origin. And it's under that mandate that the bank has now launched, our regional office in Barbados. So, for us, one thing that we've recognized also as much as we've been a trade finance institution for the last 30 years, that DNA has evolved, from just solely trade finance to acquisition financing, to guarantees issuances, to information services as well. And I harp on that because one thing we recognize also is that on the continent, a lot of trade doesn't happen, not because the opportunities are there. It's just because information can be so opaque, right? One person in Kenya doesn't know that they're able to trade with another person in Cameroon. A person in Cameroon, where I'm from, imports flowers from France, for example, not knowing that they can import flowers from Rwanda or Kenya, right? And for us, we look at that same, we are operating that same context with the Caribbean. And what we've tried to do is we understand that driving information availability is important. Now, as the bank has taken the step in setting up in the Caribbean, it's not far-fetched to believe that we're going to be the only bank from the continent looking to come to the Caribbean, or even the only business looking to come to the Caribbean. Because being on this side, we know that there's a lot of interest on the African side. And equally, we believe that these exchanges will mobilize interest from the Caribbean side, not only in trade of goods, but also in trade and services. We do believe that we can leverage the experience and the experience and the expertise of Caribbean nations in various industries, tourism especially. We always say back in the bank that, there's always soft landing countries on the continent, South Africa being one, Kenya being one. But, with the right marketing and tourism industry, you're able to create every country as somewhat of a soft landing on the continent. We launched a $1.5 billion facility available to various industries in the Caribbean that are export oriented, that fit within the bank's mandate, with an ambition to grow that even further. And for us, we're not here to necessarily compete with other banks. Our goal is to empower, looking to empower other stakeholders in the sector, to try to see how we can then grow the portfolio and thereby trying to grow trade between the continents as well as within the continent as well as Africa. So I'm sure we'll circle back to those questions. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Mekete. Definitely, we will circle back because we want to know how we can access some of that 1.5 billion. What do we need to do? So I'm sure many of the persons online will be interested in hearing more about access to that finance. Thank you so much. And Mr. Walters from the Caribbean Tourism Organization, he's the Director of Finance and Resource Management. Mr. Walters, please, your opening remarks.
Good morning. Thank you to the CSA for this opportunity to speak to this topic. A lot of what was said before, I think we would definitely concur with. But I want to just add this bit so it's, to avoid being too repetitive. What we can recognize, and as I said, a lot of what was said, yes, there's significant value to it. So the reference to tourism brings with it a significant amount of additional linkages to other industries. I believe it was the minister who pointed out that a lot of our operational structure, to use that term, not not exactly mirroring what I said. Our operational structure is based on our look more towards the North Atlantic. To look even in terms of bringing visitors from Africa, we will have to deal with the significant changes that are needed in terms of how we market our region in terms of tourism. And that spin-off then also deals with the attendant industries and sectors that feed into feeding the success of the tourism industry. The sectors that we saw fell off during the pandemic from March 2020 to 2022 and 2022 and so on. Now, the reality is, from an overall standpoint, Caribbean tourism has, as of the first half of this year, regained about roughly 95% of its levels using 2019 as the baseline for or the yardstick for Caribbean tourism and comparing it to where we are now. The expectation is that by the time we reach the end of this year, we should be back to, if not in all cases, most cases, back to 2019 levels. Some of our countries have already reached 2019 levels, but I'm speaking about the blended, the augmented. What we've also seen as well is a trajectory in Caribbean tourism for growth, even before the pandemic. So we're talking pandemic, significant fall-off decline, following growth as the sector recovered up to this point. But the reality is this is a continuing trend or trajectory from prior to March 2020. It also means that at some point we would have logically to look at markets beyond our traditional markets, UK, US, and so on, which we have done in the past as well. And from our standpoint at the CTO, Africa has been seen for some time, I should say, as one of those emerging markets that we need to tap into. Have we received the success in terms of tapping into it? No. Because I think one of my colleagues would have mentioned the issue with change and the issue with accepting that there might be some risk involved. But what I think we can show the key players is the fact that it leads to a possibility of a potential for significant growth. To a large extent, a lot of our recovery post-pandemic has been organic based on our positioning from before and so on. But for us to grow our economies to the level that is necessary to sustain the rising costs, etc., we do need to look at different markets. We need to look at not just the emerging markets that we've identified and tapped into before, but areas like Africa with emerging wealth and emerging investment and so on, and areas that are sort of like low-hanging fruit. Prior to the pandemic, we would have been looking at low-hanging fruit as South America because of proximity. But I think there's been a significant amount of change during the pandemic and reflection on the need to look at a new form of tourism, the need to look at a new form of how we market ourselves and position our product, recognizing the fact that the new traveler is a lot more interested in experiences, more so than overall, I should say, more so than looking at the specific things that we would have traditionally put out there as available in the region. So the reference you made, Mr. Refer, to culture and heritage is obviously very important to that dynamic, because that is one of the key themes we see as feeding into the whole idea of offering the visitor an experience that they will not forget by coming to the region, and also an experience that is unique to the region. I'll stop at that point, but then I'll say this as well. As we move into emerging markets, one of the things that we need to look at, in addition to airlift into the region, is also airlift within the region. And the idea of recognizing that as things change, the traveler is a lot more savvy, the traveler is a lot more knowledgeable and well-informed, and we'll be looking at garnering several experiences on one trip. That may be a little limited for some of our individual islands, but as a group, the Caribbean offers that. So at the same time, while we're doing this, and it's something we've already started at the CTO, is looking at multi-destination travel to offer a traveler that extra, bit of experience by going to someplace as well on one vacation. What it will obviously lead to is the fact that the same development of the add-ons and the linkages to other industries will occur across the Caribbean rather than focusing on the areas where there are automatic hubs where it may be easier for the air link into the region to occur. But also by fixing the intra-regional travel, it allows other destinations, not those hubs alone, to be able to benefit from some of the things that we're discussing today. So I'll stop there, introducing those thoughts to be processed this morning.
Thank you so much, Mr. Walters, and we welcome those thoughts. Most definitely, your insight into how we, from a tourism perspective, we can take advantage of the opportunities of their life, but also what we need to do to ready ourselves for welcoming these visitors and expanding, of course, across the region. Thank you so much. This is, as I said, a very important topic, and our panel discussion this morning, I just want to focus. It's such a large topic. There are many questions that I'm sure that our audience are going to pose, but we want to have some structure and focus to the conversation this morning. And we want it to be very much solutions focused and solutions driven. We have a wide cross section of persons online who are coming from all over the world, and some even in Africa. I did send a link to a couple of my business friends out there. And so there's a lot of excitement, and there's a lot of discussion around, or we'll have a lot of discussion around what we can tangibly do at this point in time. We know, Minister, and I'll come to you now, we know that the talks about, with all of the other airlines and finding the right fit, that's happening from a policy standpoint. A lot is going on regulatory. But can you give the audience this morning any insight into timelines and, what we can expect? I know you can't be specific, but is this a 3-year, 5-year? And another question that's linked to that is, what can we do who are the industry practitioners, those who want to go off and take that plunge, who are not as risk averse? What would you suggest we can do now? What can we tap into? What does the government have at play right now? Minister?
Okay, thank you for the question. I think there are two approaches to that question. The first one is the chronological thing where you ask for a timeline. As you would appreciate, in the context of negotiating with an airline, it is almost impossible to say this is going to take another 2 months, 3 months, whatever, because both sides are trying to make this work while at the same time recognizing that it has to be commercially feasible. It is quite likely that on the basis of curiosity, for example, people would leave Guyana to want to come to that place where their ancestors were taken forcibly and to reconnect almost in a spiritual and sentimental way with the experience or the place to which their ancestors were taken. Equally, on the flip side of the coin, we obviously in the Caribbean have a yearning and a passion to reconnect to Africa, because that is really for the vast majority of us where we would have come from. But there has to be a sense of certainty in the economic proposition and the commercial proposition that once that plane is taken off, or the plane is committed to a schedule between Barbados and Ghana, for argument's sake, that every day, 5 days a week, or every Monday, once every week, or whatever the schedule set of time is, that we are going to be able to fill that plane. And if we can't fill that plane, then there has to be a certainty as to how you're going to subsidize those empty seats. And for how long are you likely to have to project to subsidize those seats? Because that comes at a cost. And in the context of airlines, obviously, that speaks to their viability over a long term. And equally, whether the airline is public discussions. I want to say to you that without reference to the specific chronology in terms of when we will likely end any of those discussions, that there are some clear things that we have understood now from the start of the conversation. it is fairly easy to say that between Barbados and Ghana, for argument's sake, or just broadly the west coast of Africa, we would probably, if we started tomorrow, be looking at a set of circumstances where we will have to subsidize the aircraft. The average size aircraft I'm talking about now probably would be the same one that you or I would get into to take us to North America. But that would come at a cost of about $200,000 US currency each way per trip. Now, that is a fairly tall order. How do you get to the point where you can chip away at that significantly so as to make this work? One clear suggestion is that we have charter operations which help build the familiarity about the market from both our end into the west coast of Africa, and equally in the reverse from the west coast of Africa into our end. There's also a school of thought, and I think that Mr. Walters touched on that just now, that multi-destinational tourism would be an ideal way of enabling the African who is leaving the west coast of Africa or any other part of Africa to come to the Caribbean and have a broader experience, multicultural experience. It might be a tourism experience that sees Barbados along with, let us say, an Aruba or Curacao and a Martinique. So you get a combination of the French and the English and the Dutch. It could be any design of that nature. Or simply just multi-island in terms of the English-speaking Caribbean. We have to work through that. But here again is the problem that I alluded to before. We have failed even among ourselves to get multi-destination tourism to work so that, or to work very effectively. So that while there's some element of it in the Caribbean, the truth is that the average visitor who's coming here from North America or England is not coming here to do a multi-destination tourism experience. And therefore we are being forced now to look seriously at going back to first principles, which we perhaps did not treat very effectively. The last thing that I would want to say to you, however, is this, and I want to tie this in so that the whole conversation makes sense, because I think all of the panelists here made a number of valuable contributions. Dr. Tanis, I think, was the person who spoke to the new brand of, or new breed of entrepreneur. I could not agree with her more. And she made the point that we in the trade specialists would call movement of natural persons and commercial presence. That simply means that a human being is going to leave where he or she is and go into Ghana. I would leave here in Barbados and establish a branch of my operations that is the commercial presence in Kenya. But the fact of the matter is that even beyond that, what we need is a new entrepreneur who is going to say that he or she is prepared to explore business via the technological tools that are at our fingertips. The provision of services, which is what this conversation is specifically about, via that technological format, so that we're talking about e-commerce, we're talking about providing electronic services, and they can be in any of the areas. We can teach electronically. We can provide health care and health advice electronically. We can get into payment processes and processing of all of the different operations of a business electronically. And quite frankly, as I say that, it comes to mind that we also need to work through how the payment systems would work out once we start to do that. And again, even within our own region and sometimes even within our own domestic countries, we have not satisfactorily worked out how those payment systems work electronically or should work electronically. So, but I want to make the point that you link the concepts of broadcasting and film and music being electronically provided, and the ideal of having a virtual tourism experience. Mr. Walters talked about the thirst of the modern traveler for experiences. As a former tourism minister, I can only agree. But that experience can, first of all, you can whet the appetite of the potential customer by allowing him or her to go on the web and experience Barbados in all of its different shapes, colors, and forms. All of the offerings that we have in terms of our tourism product, and indeed, all of the commodities that we produce can be shared with them online And so therefore there is a stimulation of an appetite to experience that which they are seeing very tastefully presented to them online. That, once done, allows the new entrepreneur to be actually the tool that makes people then decide, I'm going to get into the aircraft, because that which I have seen presented, that which I am being taught about how Barbadians cook and how Barbadians prepare this thing called a flying fish, and how Barbadians do all the other things that we do that are unique to us, but are not being shared digitally. That is really where I think that we enter that space that allows us to build the bridge of desire that makes people want then to get into the aircraft to move, and it makes the whole tourism process work a lot more easily.
Thank you for that, Minister. Very, very important, because I wanted to hone in on what you said about the innovative entrepreneur. And I'm going to lead with a question to Dr. Tanis as it relates to this. How would you assess, Dr. Tanis, our readiness, even in terms of small, medium-sized entrepreneurs, large, small? How would you assess where we are at? You mentioned that what we need to embrace in terms of stepping out and being less risk averse and just believing in what we have and know we can go to another market, having done the research. How would you assess where we are in a tangible way, Dr. Tanis, and maybe give solutions on what we need to do to ready ourselves as industry professionals?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the feedback from Mr. Walters is also very instructive in this regard. As well as the feedback from Minister Simmons. We have to understand how people move, why they move, what motivates them to go and to invest. The private sector is a bit of a misnomer, because it is really a phenomenally diverse set of enterprises and endeavors. And I think when we speak about the risk averseness or risk aversion of quote unquote the private sector, mentally we have an attachment with the traditional private sector, the big businesses, the large businesses that we don't see necessarily moving at the speed at which we'd like them to move. And I don't think you will, to be perfectly frank with you at this stage. As I said before, if you're looking for exponential growth, the large established players who have been around for decades and who already have the resources and the finances and the backends to be in the markets that they want to be in and are not there for a reason. They've had decades of reviewing markets and deciding whether or not they're interested and so on. I don't think that's where the opportunity is. And therefore, if we're looking at that class of capital, I would say zero readiness, very little interest in exploring new, exciting markets. And let's not forget that Africa is not only a new market for trade. For a lot of the Caribbean, it's a new market, it's a new place, period. And I think that's the first barrier that we have to overcome. All of us know North America, all of us know the North Atlantic. We're very familiar with it. We go there, we shop there and so on. Then as we're there, we say, okay, fine, we're comfortable. There's a good place to invest. I understand it. I understand the context of trade and how the economy works. And therefore here, I want to put my capital here. That's where we have to start. I believe Mr. Walter said it best. People have to get familiar, and the gentleman from Exim Bank as well, like he said, this is not really a trade discussion. This is a discussion as to how we engage our people at a pretty fundamental level. Right? And I firmly believe that once we start to do that, we will start to see an interest being generated in trade, because trade will be a natural extension of our engagement. The private sector, there's some elements of the private sector are not risk averse at all. And I often say, just to use a Barbados example, there are two streets that are very adjacent to each other, Broad Street and Swan Street. Okay, the parallels and the distinction, that juxtapositions could not be more distinct. One is more traditional, well established, not faring terribly well. And the other one is a constant and vibrant hive of activity that has largely exploited Central America as a key source a key source market for their goods, where there's a language barrier, by the way, in Panama. So when persons speak about the risk averseness of the private sector, I normally have to kind of distill that in terms of which particular subsector they are actually referring to, because there is an appetite, there is a thirst, and it is demonstrated that there are sectors of the, particularly the smaller and the medium-sized enterprises, because by most definitions, even large businesses in Barbados are medium-sized enterprises. We have primarily micro and medium enterprises. Small businesses essentially are maybe 70% of the private sector in Barbados in real terms. The real micro entrepreneur, the risk taker, the person who has a sophisticated hustle, who's already exploiting foreign markets, near shore markets. Those, I believe, are the opportunity that we have, not just in Barbados, but CARICOM, to really sit them down in a very structured way. And I think in terms of how we get them there, Amanda, we need to almost connect the dots. And I love the model that FXM Bank has brought, because it is not just a financing model. It is also a business facilitation model. It is almost a connect the dots model. How do I get my idea financed, accredited, and into the space? And I think we're going to have to create mechanisms where we have offices, bilateral offices, where we can actually sit down, we can actually go through almost a checklist, a color by numbers approach to these young, bright entrepreneurs that are quite happy if we have the financing to take that risk and to go, and really just lay it out for them. This is essentially how you secure the licenses in this particular country. This is essentially how you need to engage in terms of employment legislation. This is how you secure property. This is the agency that you have to go to, essentially, and lay out all for them. All you need is the will and the finance to get there. And when you get there, there's a correspondent office, in these particular jurisdictions that knows you're coming, will sit down and accept you. You already have gone through the vetting process for FXM Bank or some other, CARICOM facilitating or accreditation facility, and essentially you can hit the ground running in terms of setting your business up. I think those are the kind of things that we need to start speaking about.
Absolutely. And at BCSI, we talk a lot about the hand holding that's necessary. We take it for granted that people know. And I think it's our responsibility as persons serving the industry to provide the mechanism that you spoke about and connect the dots, as you said, from the idea and going to the funding to even when they get there, what do they expect? And that hand holding is what we need right now to be able to create the type of environment and to get some solutions going and some practical solutions going in terms of people or service providers or professionals. We are service industry. We also know from BCSI in engaging our members that there is excitement, but they just don't know how to. And I think that once we are able to give them the how to, Minister, you would appreciate the how to is important. Once we give them the how to, and we get 1, 2, 3 persons point, the floodgates are going to open in terms of the belief and the desire. So I want to move to Mr. Mukete in terms of Dr. Tani spoke about the holistic approach you've brought to Barbados and to the region in terms of what you offer, not just the finance, but somewhat hand-holding in the financial aspect. Can you speak specifically to what services you offer, and in simple terms, because I know finance people kind of have the jargon, but for members of the audience who are online, who are hearing about this bank, can you walk us through what, let's say I'm an entrepreneur, which I am coming to your bank, take me through what that conversation with me would be like.
Sure. Thank you so much. And that's a very important question. So one thing I should have mentioned was one thing that we do, what denotes the strategy is this thing called connect, create, deliver, right? And the idea is connecting the opportunity, thereby connecting the opportunity, thereby connecting the entrepreneur with the knowledge base, with the relevant support, and ultimately delivering with the financing and whatever financial solutions that they may be looking for. And for that, as a DFI, you're not only looking at finance, but you're also looking to provide facilitation services. So there are a range of things that we do. Things that are very specific to maybe a client, other things that are very specific to an industry, an initiative. One of those things is our Africa Caribbean Trade and Investment Forum that will be taking place for the second time this year in Guyana next week. Right, the inaugural event was held in Barbados last year, and was a wonderful event where we were able to engage several business people. But I'm saying that to say what that does is it provides information, and it harkens me back to what I was saying previously, and I believe what the Honorable Minister had mentioned as well, is that many people, if you can unlock information and it's not as opaque, right? You're creating opportunities, both commercial, leisure, across the board, really, for that to be exploited. And to answer your question directly, the bank has a trade information services desk, whereby if a business comes in and they say, hey, listen, I've been making coffee for the last 10 years. I'm looking for new markets where I can exploit this. I have a Francophone driven business and I've been operating Francophone West Africa, but I want to see what the opportunity is like in the French Caribbean. We do have a desk that creates a bespoke package to that business to provide them with the tools, the resources, and the information to exploit that. And accompanying that clearly is the financing that we're able to provide, right? Looking at the business model, if it's something that fits our mandates, right? Because we do finance a lot of things, but we don't finance absolutely everything. And typically as a debt financier, we only finance up to 70 to 80% of any single project. So if the total funding requirement for a particular contract is $100 million, we would come in at $70 to $80 million of that, right? And we also have an advisory services desk that's able to support you with the equity raise to supplement that gap funding. So essentially, we do try to provide a suite of solutions to cater to the exact transaction. And typically for us, as long as it's export oriented, and we brought in the definition of exports, right? It's not just in hard goods or commodities, but for us, we also look at export of content, right? Content is an export in and of itself. And the benefits that come from exporting music, I mean, we've seen what Afrobeats has done for the continent. You look at how a very wealthy city such as Los Angeles, its entire wealth is completely based on entertainment and intellectual property and content. And given just the richness of the Caribbean, of the Caribbean culture and African culture, we don't see any reason why we can't do the same and cross collaborate and cross pollinate with other industries and sectors. Another thing that we do is we do something called twinning, whereby people that we've supported, clients that we've supported, they often join some of our executives or some of our senior team members on trips, on missions, whereby they help them win contracts, introduce them to other clients, and try to create that connectivity whereby they may get business opportunity. And they win contracts off the back of which we finance, right? We typically do that. That's been done mostly in our EPC program. And I mean, across the board, another thing that's very similar to that in even the creative industries is, there are a host of fashion designers on the continent that our creative finance team takes to various fashion weeks in the world, right? So it's Paris Fashion Week, New York Fashion Week, London Fashion Week, for them to walk the runway. And we found out that because these designers who had great products have never had the opportunity to go down these runways. There's a lot of excitement around them once they go down, and there are various orders that they're able to generate. And as you can imagine, many of them don't have the capital to be able to actually fulfill the order. So we come in and finance those contracts, at least finance the production of those clothes off the back of this festival, off of the back of bringing them to these shows. And that's really across the board. I mean, what we try to do is we try to connect, and where there's an opportunity to finance, we then come through and finance. But another thing, maybe I'll just close on this. One last thing that we do is we have a project preparation finance facility where, something that we often lack on the continent is project development, right? And project development services and project development capacity. But the project does exist nonetheless, right? But it's just presenting it in such a way that is bankable, that it can raise capital. So we have a project preparation facility team whereby they would essentially finance the feasibility studies and the project development of a particular idea. We would finance this up to about $2-3 million. And once that project is at a point of bankability and the bank can come in and finance, whether it be by ourselves or whether it be with other financing parties, that loan for that feasibility study, therefore, then migrates to the loan for the project itself. So that's a suite. So there's a suite of things in there, and I'm happy to share a presentation that may speak to that.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Mekete. A follow-up question quickly. So to access these services, do I have to be a client? Is there a cost to, because a lot of it is preparation. So is there a cost to it? Or is it that your doors are open and we can come and say, we want to have a conversation, we want to meet with your advisory team, we have an idea. How does that work in terms of accessing those services?
Our doors are open and we're just very accessible. There is no protocol. We're very accessible. There are different teams that one can email with ideally what we would look to do is we would like to at least see a comprehensive deck that captures all the information, who the company is, who its proprietors are, what its operation is, what it's been doing over the last few years, and where they plan to go and what the exact request is from the bank. But no, there's no cost. The only time a cost would emerge, it's say during the actual transaction process, say with a disbursement fee or anything of that sort. But no, there's no cost to the clients when it comes to engaging us. Our doors are very open. I think it's just a matter of knowing which door through the bank to come through. And it just depends on what exactly they're looking for, right? We have an export development team, we have an inter-Africa trade team, which is where I sit. We have a project finance team, guarantees and specialized finance team as well. And, each of them have their own entry points as far as emails and things of that sort. But I'm happy to, leave my contact here.
Thank you, Mr. Mekete. And as a board director of BCSI, most definitely, and I speak for the executive director, and these are the type of conversations we're having as a board. How do we structure the communication information flow? So I can see coming out of our discussions, I know BCSI, we did pay a courtesy call to the bank and met with you and your colleague, but certainly coming out of this, we can see a need for us as a service industries, as representing the membership of BCSI, that we maybe could be that information hub for our members and for others. So thank you. That's very, very good information that you've shared with us. And I'm sure our audience were taking notes as to how they can approach and get themselves ready for financing and capital investment. I want to move to Mr. Walters. You gave such a great opening remarks in terms of feeding our insight into what, from a tourism standpoint, the importance of this connectivity, the airlift, but also the human element. And you mentioned the importance, Mr. Waters, of the digitization of our product. The minister mentioned a virtual tour, a virtual experience that we can offer from a tourism standpoint. And Dr. Tanis rightly mentioned that we need to create the desire. When people go to places, if they experience it as a tourist, they get comfortable, they return, and then you have then the natural desire maybe to set up a business and so forth. In terms of where we are at CTO, where are we at with this notion, or is there anything tangible you can tell us what's happening in terms of this digitization thrust? What's happening at CTO in terms of addressing the technological aspect, or maybe the virtualization aspect and others, for us to be able to really leverage these opportunities that are coming? Okay, Mr. Waters, we're not hearing you. I'm not sure if you're on mute.
Yes, I am. Apologies. Sorry.
Okay.
Sorry about
All
that.
right.
I thought it was my headphones. Sorry about
That's
that.
okay.
Yeah, I was saying one of the things that Dr. Tanis alluded to, which I thought was quite interesting, was the fact that where she positioned the fact that there are risk takers in services and small businesses and so on. I'm not quoting her exactly, but it is interesting that she mentioned that, because one of the things that we're currently doing is working on clustering small and medium-sized businesses to be able to facilitate add-ons to the tourism industry. As an example, for years, the Complete Caribbean Partnership Facility, which is a collaboration of different funding agencies, would have been working on creating clusters of businesses in different areas across the Caribbean. And in the last 2 years, we've actually had a project in Dominica, Bahamas, and Belize, I believe it is, looking at creating clusters of small businesses to enable small businesses to function in a new tourism landscape. One of the significant parts of that is actually enabling them to access banking. One of the things that we recognize is that a lot of smaller businesses are very averse to entering the banking sector or being part of a banking system for a number of reasons. Some of the reasons we've heard is in terms of being able to be monitored for taxes. Some of the reasons the other reason we've heard is in terms of not trusting the system and then the high fees that are paid. But what we've been doing is trying to encourage small and medium-sized businesses in those locations through a series of projects and interventions to create a business model that can then be rolled out across the region to enable businesses of that size or those sizes to come together, create an infrastructure that allows them to function. There would obviously need to be some levels of commonalities between the businesses, but the idea is that individually they may not want to go to a bank for funding or a financial institution for funding, but they can do it as a group. And also in terms of putting up the initial or the seed funding as a group, as opposed to an individual taking on all the risk themselves. That's number one. The other thing that we've been looking at, and this was even before this, was the fact that what we've been trying to do as well is to push, based on a study done by the same Complete Caribbean Partnership Facility, the idea of looking at digitizing and using digital technology to be able to enhance the tourism product. The minister alluded to it already, the whole idea of giving a virtual tour of properties, which I know some properties around the world are already doing. But the idea of saying having like a virtual tour of a attraction in a destination. The person we know is already coming to the destination, but it is an attempt to ensure that the spend by the visitor trickles out to different sectors of the society and not just stay in what were the traditional sectors, the accommodation sector, the restaurant sector, and so on, but also looking at persons outside of the normal spheres of tourism influence, so that that project I mentioned does not stick to the shoreline. It doesn't stick to the sun, sea, sand concept, but it looks at people doing fabrics, textiles, etc. I think there was even as far as I know, there's even some influx in terms of culture. Looking at the Garifuna, I believe in Belize, and I think there's part of that also in Dominica. But the point is that looking at the product holistically and saying, look, the people that are in small and medium businesses are people who would have handed down traditions, handed down the concepts that they have from generation to generation. They are the purveyors of authentic experiences. And at the end of the day, if you can say to a visitor, come to our destination and you will have this experience, which stands up to muster, stands up to scrutiny, it is easily verifiable, then you're also saying to them, this is a destination that respects its culture, respects its heritage. And as I pointed out at the beginning, a lot more travelers are very much interested in that. In addition, we are also paying a lot more attention to the whole farm to table concept. And it has actually rolled out in several countries, and I know there's some businesses like that here in Barbados as well. But the idea of saying to the visitor, come, in some cases, and you can also go on the farm, you can pick the vegetables, the fruit or whatever that make up the actual dish, and be a part of that whole experience. The point I'm making is those are not the traditional large businesses that are the purveyors of those type of experiences. They're the smaller ones. And what we've been trying to do is to find ways to facilitate it without having capital ourselves, but actually putting them in a structure that allows them to access the capital. Last point I made in terms of digitalization, if we recognize that we have an experience of our product that is unique, it obviously makes selling it as a digital experience a lot more easy. If it's a case where once we put up our digital experience, somebody else can also do the same, then it's a case where that is not a sustainable product. But we need to look very carefully when we go to that level or go to that process of digitalization, that we are actually doing something unique. Because it's very easy. There are a lot of people out there developing these type of products to ensure that when we develop our own, it passes the uniqueness that then we can continue to market it, to sell it over a period of time. It's just not a one-stop shop. The last thing that I'm going to say is I'm going to quote this: necessity is the mother of invention. It's something that we learned growing up. It's something I think a lot of us recognized during the pandemic. There are some instances in the Caribbean where persons who were parts of the whole tourism trade, or at least the attraction side of tourism, recognizing that visitors were not coming to their shores, created online businesses to sell their products to persons who might have heard about the products or even if it is a product that people buy on a recurrent basis, sell those products in an online environment. Persons no longer had to come to the destination to get it, but the product was made available. It is that type of innovation, is that type of change, that type of nimbleness that I think I will concur with Dr. Tanis. That level in the whole business sector is able to embrace and is able to take on and deal with in a much more meaningful way than the larger brick and mortar traditional businesses. So yes, I think it's something that we will continue as well at the CTO for some time to come.
And thank you, Mr. Waters. Just as a follow-up, the cluster concept, I think, is a very effective and powerful concept, especially for small and medium-sized organizations and small islands as well. In terms of what's happening at the Caribbean level, at maybe, I don't want to say CARICOM, but how what's the conversation, well, in terms of the tourism sector from CTO standpoint with other islands, and is there clustering of effort, if we could use that terminology, among islands and tourism boards as it relates to this issue? Because I believe there's strength in numbers, you know. Can you share any insight into the regional conversation from a tourism perspective?
Well, I would say this: there are some islands in the region that are far down the road in this way already, and they didn't even require CTO's input. But what we're looking at is the whole idea of community-based tourism as a means to improve the inclusivity in the sector, to avoid the fall off that we had and the attendant loss of revenues. And so after COVID, based on the things I mentioned before, our view is that several islands already have the whole idea of community-based tourism, and the community-based and the clustering concept was actually introduced in an attempt to make that bigger. To make that bigger part of the whole business climate around tourism in the Caribbean. We put it out there as a best practice and pretty much leave it to the destination or the island to determine how they will incorporate it. So we've seen it done on an individual basis for communities. And as I said, we've seen it done on a clustering basis. There are some very good examples, as like in Guyana, where there's a Rupununi project promoting big game fishing and so on. And the fact that based on the type of visitor that they were looking to attract, they needed to have several different services in attendance at the same time, not just the fishing, not just the tourism, but you're looking at a luxury type product. So you're looking at your ambulance services, your medical services, etc., basic transportation services, and so on. So the point I'm making is we've seen some very strong examples of it taking root. We've seen some examples where governments have gone ahead and done it, but we continue to put it out there as a best practice for small communities, small destinations, and also a means, as I said, to improve the buy-in by the average person into the tourism sector, which has been traditionally seen as kept for a certain group of individuals. We're looking at moving that away and including the spend and the revenue that goes more directly into more households.
Thank you, Mr. Walters, for that. Dr. Tanis, I want to get your input in terms of your opinion as it relates to the whole digitization conversation, especially for small and medium-sized organizations, entrepreneurs, consultants, and persons in the professional sector as well. What is your take in terms of the e-commerce platforms, and what's the state of e-commerce? What's the state of the digitization? That's the go-to word now. Digital technologies. Where are we at as a country, and how have we been leveraging this as it relates to trade and opportunities and market entry and so forth?
Well, the small, medium-sized enterprises and those who certainly have, I think, the innate skill and capacity, and particularly those who are in the space themselves that can actually create their own content, design their own websites, leverage, fintech and blockchain type technologies to create, their own e-commerce platforms, are certainly a curve ahead. I think there is currently a project, I believe, funded. The Small Business Association already has their own project in the works. I think the government has also announced some degree of facilitation, bringing them onto a common platform. And I think this is where we need to go in terms of leveraging the economies of scale. So whilst there is a very growing underswelling of the use of this technology, and I think it is quite agile and quite smart and extremely efficient, and therefore small and medium-sized enterprises certainly don't lose a beat in grabbing those low cost, quick to entry and enter market type facilities. I think there's still a huge opportunity for putting them onto a common platform, not just for small, medium, to be honest. I think certainly when it looks to banking services and digital wallet services and those types of things that are coming onto the fore, coming away from the traditional commercial banking services, tremendous interest in taking out the middleman in terms of, financially between you and your customer, and not just for goods and services, but also for payment settlements. That is creating a little bit of a regulatory challenge because regulators now have to kind of keep up and keep the pace with what is occurring in that space. We do need a lot more sandboxing being provided by the various regulatory institutions across the region so that we can actually get this technology to market and know exactly what the impacts are, what the challenges are, what the mischiefs are that can be created, and the checks and balances so that we have a seamless, clean process from end to end, that business can be facilitated without overly being regulated. But I think the interest is there. Where persons do have their individual capacity to launch those types of platforms, they have. What is needed now is, I think, we can really take it to the next level by seeing if we can create a common platform, similar to what Caris would have done with the ATM banking platform years ago. That's now being replaced by Visa, MasterCard, debit. We can do that now with digital wallets. We do have lots of individual digital wallet products popping up, not just in Barbados, but no doubt across the region. I had a recent discussion with a player, and I said, well, look, why don't we do a Caris for digital wallets? Why don't the players come together and say, look, for the interest of all of us, and reducing our cost of investing in this digital settlement space, why don't we come up with a digital wallet settlement platform very similar to what Caris did with the traditional commercial banks? I think those are the types of things that I think small and medium enterprises are always not going to optimize if they try to go it alone. You need to come together with mutually beneficial mechanisms to create the critical mass that you need to take your business to the next level. So I don't know if that answers your question, Amanda, but those would be my thoughts.
No, that is important to get that perspective, Dr. Tanis, because there are many of us that are in the industry that are sitting here listening, and all we're thinking is, okay, how do we get this done? Who do we connect to? How can we come together? That seems to be a common thread and a common philosophical view for us as small and medium-sized enterprises. And so your perspective is very important.
If I can add, Amanda, that we do need small, medium-sized enterprises to understand where our competition is and where our competition is not. And there are spaces that we are going to have to lay a truce down, and for the purposes of all of our businesses, be mutually inclusive, particularly when it comes to the area of digitization, because that is what drives costs down. And then we're going to have to realize that we're not competing on that platform necessarily, but we're competing elsewhere. We're competing in terms of our value proposition. We're competing in terms of our service levels. We're competing in terms of, our market, first to market, and our innovation. But we may need not to be competing in terms of the technologies and digital payment technologies. We may need to set up marketplaces, which Amazon has done phenomenally well. We think of Amazon as a huge logistics player. Amazon is really a marketplace for tiny people, who started out with very, very little capacity, and essentially are using Amazon as again, their marketplace. We can do that in the Caribbean. We can do that. We can create a virtual marketplace. That is essentially what our Amazon is. And the logistics and built out from there because of the demand that was coming through. But more and more, when we see essentially e-commerce and digitization as being a facilitator and not necessarily the place where we're competing, I think our mindset will start to shift, and we'll start to get more value and drive the cost of doing business down.
Dr. Tanis, can we have a champion for that virtual marketplace? Like, where would something like that's such a fantastic idea. And maybe Minister, you could come in here, please, because remember, this is a solutions discussion. But that virtual marketplace, in the framework of government and private sector, where could we house that? Who can we ask to champion that initiative?
But to be honest with you, that is exactly where I was hoping we would go when I was suggesting to you that that is the way in which I think we should start to approach the question of selling tourism services into a place like Africa, which is really a brand new market for us. I can tell you for a fact that in Barbados, for example, the Barbados Tourism Marketing Incorporated has what I believe is the country's largest engine with respect to the marketing of the tourism product. What we have done is to try to market all of the hotels and the tourism products traditionally. What we have not done is to marry that with the presence of all of our commodities, so that I do not think if you went on that website now that you will see anything about the wonderful services that are provided by Unicommerce in Barbados. That is not to give them a free advertisement, Dr. Tanis, but that is just to give an example, or any of the other products coming out of the country. And I think that is really where we must now create that marriage of what has been traditionally commodities trade and the major tourism and hospitality services trade, along with a number of other types of products which can be facilitated and promoted online. For example, why should the country, while selling its tourism product, be silent on its financial services more broadly? And the type of financial services supporting architecture, which we have put together legislatively, that makes us such a competitive place if you're interested in finding and getting engaged in financial services. So it is that holistic approach that I really think we need to do. And again, for Barbados, is really not reinventing the wheel. And frankly, I buy into Dr. Tanis's view about Amazon. I agree 100%. It is not beyond us as a region, and it is not beyond our entrepreneurs in the digital space to build out that type of platform, which will allow not just a Barbados, but a Barbados together with a Trinidad and a Jamaica and whoever else to be found online, where all the curious potential customer in Africa or anywhere else in the world for that matter needs to do is to go and to identify what he wants in the specific jurisdiction of choice, because it should all be located there. I would only add one thing, and this is just by way of a warning. It is not as sweetly sentimental as that, because I'll go back to the point you make about communication and inflow, and I think what you called, Amanda, the how-to. It is important for a business that is contemplating going into a new space, like Africa would be, to have that communication inflow and to know the how-to. There are obviously going to be barriers of a cultural nature that you have to become accustomed to. And we've experienced this when we have seen our businesses trying to go into Latin America. There are cultural differences, there are linguistic differences, and so that will arise in Africa as well. And there are custom practices, customs that have been in place and entrenched in this new market space that you as a new person, a new entrant, must become accustomed to. But my caution is not just that. I think we also now have to go back to some first principles, without which we are going to imperil ourselves. The question of standards, there must be close attention paid to ensuring that all of the standards of not just services, but goods are met, and that international best practices are being cultivated right here, not only in Barbados, but across the Caribbean in our domestic spaces. Just to give you one example that disturbed me when I was Minister of Commerce. And I first became Minister of Commerce, I discovered that there were only about 30 to 35 companies, business entities in Barbados that had a working relationship with the Barbados National Standards Institute. Now, in a country where we pride ourselves of having, if you just look at the small and micro businesses, well over 10,000, that is a frightening statistic. and something that we have had to work hard on trying to correct. So that the question of everybody doing that which they do in accordance with an understood best practice, whether that be best practices that are being applied in tourism and hospitality or in any other sector, is vitally important. And then I think I made the point at the very beginning, this issue of mutual accreditation. It is pointless telling service suppliers that they can go into a new market if they cannot be accredited to do that which they want to do in that new space. And again, we have, I think, shot ourselves in the foot to some extent. We had a previous opportunity with the European, the EPA, the partnership agreement with Europe, that would have allowed us to build a system of mutual accreditation, not only among ourselves, but with Europe. Today, for argument's sake, just to make myself clear, to practice law in Suriname, it does not automatically happen because my qualifications, which were obtained here in the English-speaking Caribbean, are not accepted, even though Suriname is part of CARICOM. And that is true of other professionals as well. And it would be true, now bringing Martinique into the loop, and it would be true of the French Caribbean as well. But what we must do, I think, is to make sure that when we get into the African continent, that we are building the relationships not only at the standards level, but at the professional bodies accreditation level, so that we make sure that those people who are saying they will sell their services cross-border are able to do so without having to have the impediment of what are called technical barriers to trade. And I think that that is vitally important. Perhaps one day we would come to the question of a trade agreement, but I don't like the idea of governments rushing so far ahead of private enterprise. And the truth of the matter is that while the private enterprise must signal its appetite, it is also important that government facilitates and, as you say, holds hands. And in holding hands, we have to get some of the first principles. We have to be able to make sure that there are standards which are adequate. We have to make sure that there is an accreditation process so that whatever it is that you're doing is accredited in the country or the marketplace that you want to do it, and vice versa. Otherwise, we would be inviting chaos for ourselves.
Minister, as a follow-up, you really brought so much for us to think about as an industry, especially services industry. But if you can just speak a little bit, so in terms of the accreditation and the standards, this is the responsibility of the BNSI. Just paint for us a picture of where this will lay.
Okay, in almost anything that you do, in any sphere of endeavor, there is what you might wish to call a best practice. In Barbados, we have a Barbados National Standards Institute, and that is actually mirrored across the region, where I think every country in CARICOM would have an equivalent in terms of a standards institute, which is supposed to help to design the way in which we, the level at which we do our businesses, and the way in which we relate to the marketplace in which we do the businesses, so that customers should and would ordinarily not be disadvantaged or shortchanged by virtue of a quality issue. You would be building a quality economy across the region, and in every country that should be the architecture, resting on quality of your services and, of course, your goods. Now, the shortfall has been that there has not perhaps been enough emphasis, and I have said in Barbados that I do believe that our Standards Institute is perhaps the light which is being buried under the bushel. If we are to place proper emphasis on making our entrepreneurs especially able to penetrate foreign markets and to sell their goods and services overseas, then they must be able to overcome that which is the most fundamental of technical barriers to trade, and that is standards. Because if you are below the standard that I set in the market, which is the host market, remember, I have the host market, I am in control of the standards I'm setting for you to enter into that market. If you can't meet that level, then really and truly you're dead in the water before you even start. And I think that therefore we have to be lifting our people. Standards really is like a sea which is lifting all ships in order to make sure that you can cross boundaries. The second point about that I made was the question of accreditation. It impacts more specifically, but not entirely, on our professional community. So that when we think of people who could be selling services, not just in Barbados, but equally across the world and into Africa, for example, in this case, we have a whole range of professionals, which, as you know, Amanda, have come out of years of investment at that institution, which you know work with. They are shortchanged if they would want, for example, to have medical services being sold or provided online. And to give you an example of what is now possible, there are senior surgeons in the Caribbean who will go on a computer as we are talking here now, but they will determine and dictate how a surgery is to be performed. And while it is being performed, they are given guidance as to what is supposed to be done and so on and so forth. Now, you may wish to do that in the African continent or something similar. The fact of the matter is, though, that if your accreditation is not, or if your qualifications are not met and approved by the country in which you are going, to which you're going, and is going to be the host to you and your supply of services, then again, you're going to meet a technical barrier of trade. For those who are part of the English-speaking part of Africa, it may be easier because many would have gone to similar universities and colleges. But it does not necessarily follow that that is going to be the case right across the board. And it is something that we have to continue to explore and make sure that we are on top of, because it can be an impediment, as I just gave you, right here in the Caribbean. We have not resolved yet, in spite of many years of CARICOM, the differences in terms of our Dutch community and the English community and the French community and so on.
Thank you, Minister. It's at this point now that we will invite questions from the audience that's joined us online. So please, audience members, if you have any questions for the panelists, please share. We have the facility, and we will certainly pose those questions to the various panel members. Minister, I know we don't get you often, but I have to come back at you. I apologize profusely, but there's a question that I have regarding the commission, the High Commission in Ghana, and these commissions that are set up around the world, but particularly in Africa, since we're focused on a collaboration and linkage with Africa. For the purpose of the audience, can you share with us not just what these commissions do, but I have coined a phrase called commercial diplomacy. We've talked about the importance of hand-holding when going there. So we have done all the work, we are at the standard, we're ready to go from services, entrepreneurs, and we get to, let's say, Ghana. What does the commission, the High Commission, what type of services and support is offered there? I know there's a question on that. And can that be leveraged in terms of tapping into markets and industry? Can you give us some insight into the commercial, not so much diplomacy, but the commercial thrust of these commissions now?
Yeah, okay. Trade will have its impediments always, and I think that we have to recognize that. What we have done is to, and let's just use Ghana as the example for this part of the conversation. In Ghana, we have a commercial attaché, Mr. Phil Phillips, and he basically is going to be, or has been, the person who is doing a lot of the business facilitation. So that quietly, and there have been people who have been going, exploring the water over there, so that they will go into, they will make contact with him because they have an interest in getting into the Ghana marketplace. It may well be that if you are trading in goods, then you want to have an understanding of what agents are on the ground in Ghana, so that when your product arrives at the wharf, it can be then moved into a supermarket. And how does the contract with the agent get set up? Who are the best agents? Who can you recommend to work with you? Then there may be the question of your licenses, because there may be a number of licenses for you to have as you enter the country with your product, or quite frankly, even with your service, that you may need to have a licensing regime to comply with. And again, you need to know what that is. It's kind of like what you were talking about those things that you need to know, what you described as earlier as the how-to. And then, of course, basically, as I said, the trade will have its impediments, and there's therefore a need for somebody on the ground who will be able to help facilitate and hold the hand of the new entrant into the marketplace as they begin their journey, whether it is to set up in terms of their rights of establishment, or alternatively just to be able to provide that service in a one-off or over a period of time, or however they do it. There's a flip side to the coin as well, because obviously the commercial attaché has to be able to get not just the facilitation then, but the promotion. And therefore, what they're intended to do is to have that kind of diplomatic connection from our country into Africa that allows, therefore, for the promotion of the services in question or the products in question. So that to the extent, therefore, that there's a need to have a trade show, or to have a few people within a sector be able to go into the marketplace and set up to be able to share that which we do in Barbados with the potential consumer over there, so as to raise awareness, etc. Those are the things that are being done by the commercial attachés. I think you're on mute.
Apologies. I think this, thank you, Minister. This was so important to highlight, because, you know, you see these missions set up and people are wondering, well, what are they doing? It's important to highlight these things. Also, it's important for us here to understand the role and to see how we can engage.
Can I give you a real world example of how it proves successful?
Absolutely, please. Yes.
This is not October. At the end of October last year, we would have gone into Rwanda on a similar type of journey. There were a number of business people, maybe about 30 or so from Barbados, who would have accompanied us in this venture. There's one particular individual who had an interest in doing spa treatments, and he would have been able to not just go in terms of the trade exhibition, but to meet with people on the ground, because that had been facilitated for him, knowing who the business people were and who might be interested in buying into the spa treatments. Before he left Rwanda, he had a contract, and that contract was therefore to not just provide the spa treatments, but to move some of his staff from Barbados into Rwanda so that they would be able to ensure the continuity of the business enterprise's efforts, even while he is back in Barbados. So you also had not just the start of a business relationship, but the establishment of a business commercial presence on the ground in Rwanda. And I think that is really what we're trying to achieve on a broad basis.
That is fantastic. And thank you, Minister, for sharing that real story. These are real stories that are important to show that it can be done. As Dr. Tanner said, where there's entrepreneurial will and the facilitation, because had it not been for the mission, the trade mission to Rwanda, that would never have happened. So you're showing here how government, private sector, and entrepreneurship works in tandem for success. Thank you for that, Minister. I want to acknowledge now Dr. Pauline Yearwood. She's the Deputy Program Manager, Transportation at the CARICOM Secretariat. She's actually joined us on the call. We're very happy to have her. And we're going to ask her to just give some comments, because she wants to speak to the air transportation development, specifically the Multilateral Air Services Agreement, which is enforced among 11 member states. Welcome, Dr. Yearwood. Please go ahead and share with the panelists as well as the audience this information, very pertinent information.
Good morning, everyone. First thing, thank you for accepting or having us on board. Well, given the context of this this webinar, it is important to speak to the development of the air transport services, especially what we have achieved over the last few years. What we have in force is a multilateral air services agreement, which is among with the member states of the CARICOM. And in essence, what it does, it promotes and establishes the measures to promote the adoption of uniform standards and recommended practices for the provision of air transport services within the community, ensure uniformity in licensing and certification of aviation personnel within the community, and ensures that the provision of international air transport services in the community is undertaken by financially viable and technical qualified air carriers. But in the context of the MASA is unique in the context that it is had sort of liberalized our air services. What we have happening here is that in the context of our Article 5, it is one that gives us all the grants of right, the right to fly over, also cabotage and sovereign freedom. Also, what we would like to see, the development of the air transport services. So with the MASA now, we need to see services such as, which we're not seeing in the context of aviation development. The MASA has now given private persons the opportunity to look at the services, such as we can look at aircraft maintenance. We can look at things like, developments, as I said, around the airport in the context to develop the air carriers, our regional air carriers that previously had seemed impossible for some. Because what we used to do before, you had to apply to member states to enter their, to enter their territory. The MASA allows you, given the grants of rights, that you can set up services to facilitate. And as I said, you can operate within the region. Now, given the emphasis on the agriculture, we have not seen much area development in the context of air cargo development. I would like to see this build out. And I always use the example of the tourist-based countries. Just-in-time operation in the context for agriculture, especially perishables. Imagine you have another, or say Rihanna is going to get married and she decides to have a wedding in Barbados. You can cut, dice, and slice the pineapples, the watermelons, and all of those things here in Guyana, and they can be flown platter size into Barbados. Give and take, given the port health and so on operations, having all of those things in place. So we need to see those sort of developments operating where persons can come. And given the concept of how we view tourism, an international tourist might see us as one region and they don't mind having a day tour throughout. I need to see persons utilizing the MASA, and we're not seeing a lot of that as we would given that it is enforced in the member states, and it has great potential. I think it's a game changer in the context of how we are doing business, given that our operations are predominantly by air.
Thank you, Dr. Yearwood. I would invite any of the panelists to offer any comments on what Dr. Yearwood shared.
Well, I suppose I could chip in here simply to say that in my judgment, a lot of what Dr. Yearwood has said gives you an understanding of what is happening within this region, that's CARICOM. Much of it then has to be borrowed from the structure that we have put in place within CARICOM now has to have some aspects of it being applied to and between ourselves and Africa. Because that air services agreement is not all that is going to be required for us to be able to get into Africa. So that, for example, we had to have one air service agreement with Ghana. When I was tourism minister, we concluded that. Then we subsequently did one with Kenya. So those are now in place. similar issues will arise, therefore, benefits will arise to that which Dr. Yerwood would just have alluded to. Then the question now becomes the definition or the identification of routes which are either direct or via third states between Barbados, for example, and any other country in Africa, the different points in Africa where we wish to bring travelers from. And that is part of what the current discussions are. Because obviously you want to pick your markets on the basis of not just sentiment, but what will likely produce the best results in terms of the commercial realities that we are confronted. You had earlier asked me a question, Amanda, of how long it takes. Very often what happens that takes time, and quite frankly, what has taken a lot of time now, is testing the markets in terms not just of an interest, but the returns that we are likely to get from that marketplace. Interest is a low-hanging fruit, but really what you want to do is to be able to fill a plane and consistently do so. And remember that it is not just someone in Africa taking an interest or curiosity about coming to the Caribbean. Coming to Barbados, for example, is traveling a distance to a destination that is deemed to be a fairly high-cost destination. Does the cost of living in Barbados fit the pocket of the average person in Ghana, or does it better fit the pocket of the average person in Nigeria? If in fact it fits the pocket of the average person in Nigeria, or there's a segment of the Nigerian market which easily would be able to fit into what we require in Barbados by way of I think Mr. Walter just used the term spend, a passenger who will come, a tourist who will come and spend, which is really what we want, then the question now becomes, how do we get that person to Barbados most effectively? Planes originating of Ghana may not be the solution. So that it is a more complicated type of discussion that we are having. As I said, and in fact, let me just go a little bit further because I think the point was just made about air cargo. It is also about finding aircraft or having a relationship that will allow us to have the size of aircraft that makes it possible for us to move some cargo as well. Part of our challenge in the Caribbean is that we don't own shipping lines. And so therefore, being able to move commodities here to Africa, any one of the countries, for example, on the west coast of Africa, will be a problematic an issue because of the fact that we don't have the ships. So that in the absence of having shipping lines in place at this point in time, what we are trying to do is to make sure that we will have aircraft, the belly of which then will be able to carry not just the luggage of passengers, but to move commodities as well. But as I was saying to you, the other issue really becomes then the need for governments on both sides to be able to have the time to set aside the resources, because we're all financially strapped, both sides of the pond. And part of what we must do is to start by subsidizing seats. We can have charter operations, which, as I said, will build familiarity. They will move people to some degree. We can organize it, structure it so you can have sporting communities, being able to come by way of charter and have that type of experience. Religious communities come in having that type of experience. Business and innovation experiences. And we've had large exhibitions. We had one here, trade show last year, I believe it was, and there's another one in Guyana this year. Those will move people, but that is more around events. What we want to be able to do is to have this now become a growing familiarity so that people will be coming in the same way that the British can be relied upon to get here every year during the season. Now, there's another issue that I must tell you we've been silent on, but I think is very important. The value of the African market, much like much of Latin America, is that it is not, sorry, let me put it the other way around. It will take us out of the box that we have put ourselves into, where we are seen around the world as a warm weather getaway. I want to suggest to you that the Caribbean and Barbados is far more than that. And therefore, you want the, going back to Mr. Walters' is very, very valid point about experiences. We want people to travel to experience the product in its total scope. So that this genealogical tourism that you were talking about, you want people to experience our film and our music and our festivals. You want people to come to consume all of the things that make us a unique type of destination. The advantage is that the Africans are not coming because it is cold. And so therefore you're able to fill that trough, especially between the months of September down to this time of the year, end of October, November, where hotels traditionally either close or go into slow motion mode. And we have a tourism industry that functions 8 or 9 months of a year. That must stop. I can't think of anywhere in the world where the major industry is an 8 to 9 month industry. It has to be a year-round industry, but therefore you have to fill that trough period by people who are going to travel, not just for the purposes of work, but for the purposes of other things such as experience. And that is why Africa, like Latin America, becomes such a valuable proposition, because it allows us to get out of that warm weather getaway box that we have built ourselves into. But as I said, the major challenge then becomes above and beyond starting this process by way of charters. And I can tell you there's a lot of interest in that. How we on both sides, the governments in Africa and the governments in the Caribbean, must now set aside resources to subsidize seats for a period of time as you begin from ground zero to build out and flesh out the type of tourism trade that you want to have, so that you have scheduled carriers coming into the country on a frequent basis. Now, one way in which I think we can successfully do this is if, again, go back to the point of multi-tourism destination, and we marry that which we have done perhaps better than anywhere else in the world into the desirability of having people get on a plane and visit the Caribbean. And that is, the marriage must involve, and to some extent, the cruise tourism experience. There was a period of time, and I believe we are not far removed from this statistic, but I remember when I first served in cabinet, the Caribbean enjoyed 54% of the world's cruise travel. I suspect that may have eroded slightly, but frankly speaking, we are one of the most sought after cruise destinations on the planet. We do remarkably well because our itinerary takes us to multiple countries with multiple types of experiences. And it should therefore be part of the proposition that we must now finance. And this is where private capital in the Caribbean, not just governments, because by ourselves, governments are far too cash-strapped in this region to be able to deliver this successfully alone. But we must have private capital in this region, and extra-regionally, if necessary, people who are of goodwill to the region coming on board so that we can marry the cruise experience and us getting access to the cruise ships, because none of us own these cruise ships. They're going to have to be leased and operated, but they must be part of the process. There is no cruise itinerary right now that functions between Africa and the Caribbean. We're not likely to get to that point for a while, but what we can do is to flesh into the cruise itinerary that already exists. Let us say this winter season, there's going to be a number of ships in the region. We need to get some of those ships populated, not just by the Brits coming down here to have the warm weather getaway, but populated as well by the African community. And we therefore need to move that cruise season now into a more extended term so that it is not just beginning in November and ending in May or April, but that it can go successfully across the year, because we are bringing people into the Caribbean for other purposes than getting away from the snow. So this is a larger discussion, and I just wanted to make that point because it helps people that. Yeah.
Yes, good. Hello.
Dr. Yearley wants to just respond quickly to you.
Yes, just quickly. I just could give that brief introduction from the Caribbean perspective. And as Minister, I really appreciate what you're saying there. But also to point and show the synergies. Embedded in the MASA is an aspect called the community of interest principle, which in the context, if we are to be dependent on I want to just make the point that we don't totally have to depend on the African carriers to come in. We can designate from within this sector one of our regional carriers to be going out there, notwithstanding the air services agreements we have had with those. I also want to make the point too that in the context and in supporting the minister's point, yes, I see this discussion is very timely. Given the air route, and we seeing ourselves as transit points coming through into from Africa into the USA, given the challenge they have going through the British territory, going through Britain, and so on. So I'm all very much supportive. I just wanted to use the master context to say within our construct, we have something that further supports that development in the context of airlift. This too would also, as I said, argue well for us, also giving them that opportunity, not only in even in the service context. If we further look at having our airports develop in the context to give them those other service factors like aircraft maintenance, aircraft, small operations like painting and so on and so forth. So just to, I just put placing it in the context of the whole, as I said, the whole Africa Caribbean construct, that what we have developed within our own construct fits neatly into that aspect for the air services development. Where, as I said, we will have other persons, we can have the private sector looking to develop themselves in that context. But I take your point.
Thank you, Dr. Yearwood. And just for clarification, when Dr. Yearwood mentioned MASA, it's not MASA.
It is multilateral air services. It's agreement. Yes,
yeah,
multilateral air services. I realize. Multilateral air services agreement.
That's fine. Yeah, just bring a little bit of humor to the discussion. But certainly, thank you for that exchange, Dr. Yearwood, Minister. That was very important. I just want to, before we close off, we did get questions from the audience, and we do want to have the audience engaged, and we appreciate them attending and staying on. Minister, you answered the first question really from Troy Holder. He said, are there any preliminary studies or market research data that support the establishment of a direct route? And you did mention all of the research and the discussions that are ongoing to determine what the best routes are and so forth. I don't think you may want to add anything to that question to Troy Holder.
Not really. I think I captured it. I think for us, I mean, it's not going to be the same for every country in the region, but obviously we are very aggressive on this in Barbados. And because we tend to be a higher cost destination than many, we need to find that market segment in parts of Africa that work best for us. Again, though, if it is a multi-destination proposition, it also allows for other countries to be part of the stop, so that the visit then becomes a Barbados and a Dominica, or Barbados, Dominica, St. Lucia, something like that.
Thank you, Minister. We have a question directed to Mr. Mukete from Stephen Williams. He asks, what exactly does a good project or client look like? That's a loaded question, but maybe you could tackle it. What exactly does a good project or client look like for Afrexim Bank?
Sure. No, thanks. That's a very good question. There isn't a one size fits all. What I will say is, I think the best way to answer that question is just describe the bank's mandate, right? In that, we're, as a trade finance institution, we're limited in only financing trade or trade enabling projects, right? Such as trade enabling infrastructure. If someone wants to set up a manufacturing plant, for example, if someone has trade enabling infrastructure such as roads, railway, anything that facilitates trade being the ultimate end of what the project is, that's where we're happy to come in. We don't As a DFI, we don't do real estate. As a trade finance institution, rather, we don't do real estate. It's not an area that we partake in, but we can finance the importation, or rather the service exports of an EPC contractor doing a real estate project, if that makes sense. So fundamentally, the project in and of itself needs to have a trade related element to it for it to fit that narrative for us to come in and support. And obviously for us, we'd like to know that, it isn't just an idea. There have been even some pre-feasibility studies done. There's some technical partners on board. And, we're happy to just come in and help you build off of the foundation that you've set. So there is no one case fits all, to be very honest with you. And I think sometimes, depending on the type of project, we're happy to come in and see how we can enable it to fit that narrative, if you will, right? Even if it doesn't directly do so. But that's the best way I can describe it, is if something is trade enabling or trade related, and it's something that we're happy to see how we can plug in, whether financially or non-financially.
Thank you. That was very good, Mr. Mukete. Thank you so much. From Modu, I'm going to direct this question to Dr. Tanis. It sounds like there is a lot to be put in place to make trade with Africa a reality. For example, you have to have standards, accreditation, mutual recognition. Would it be correct to say that without efficient and cost-effective transportation, trade cannot be developed with Africa? Because whether it is trade in goods or trade in services, people need to physically meet and develop business relationships first. Dr. Tanis?
I wouldn't conclude that it is impossible to develop trade without getting the air linkages and the sea lanes developed. I wouldn't say that at all. As a matter of fact, examples are rife. That is certainly not the case. And I think COVID really unearthed the true potential of persons to continue trading, in remote and digital formats. Now, as it relates to unearthing trading opportunities, I have no doubt that if we had to, we could do that virtually as well. I think when human beings, we are interesting. When we are forced into a position where we have no choice, we become extremely more innovative. And a lot of things that we put up as barriers, melt, and we find interesting ways to do things. I don't think I need to justify the fact that we need sea lanes, that we need air, air transport. I think we've exhausted that topic, and it clearly it is what moves people physically. And we need to do that. And even using the pandemic as an example, it's really not a perfect example. Look at how anxious we were to come back out and meet and greet and speak to each other and interface as human beings. That's the human element. But I don't subscribe to the fact that it's impossible to start this conversation unless we have these things locked in. I think the facilitating pieces, certainly. The barriers, the technical barriers to trade, absolutely. The business facilitation, yes. The harmonization, and not even harmonization, the mutual recognition and mapping of standards is critical, because that's different. I don't think we'll ever get to harmonization, but there at least has to be mutual recognition of each other's standards and so on. Those are the real critical pieces. I think if we had to start to do B2B, which we've started already, there's no reason why the private sector as has already started, can't start those dialogues, can't start the engagement, can't essentially have a mutual information hub, which was referenced by Afreximbank, that we actually start to harvest data, harvest opportunities, start to do financial feasibility, and then it's essentially, see how we can get there. Do we need to get there far more efficiently in a less costly manner than we have to do now? Absolutely. Is it impossible to do business? No, I don't think it is impossible. to do business in that. If we don't get these pieces started, the physical infrastructure started, then it's dead in the water. I think the facilitation pieces, the harmonization, the standards, the mutual recognition. I personally think free trade areas are something that we do have to look at for sure. But we do have to get all those pieces in place first. We do have to get our cultures very familiar and comfortable with each other. We have to get our people comfortable with each other. And there are various platforms that we can start to do that. And most notably would be the cultural industries, the music industry. Those are common languages that we all speak that get us essentially, very familiar with each other very, very, very quickly, and that are quite frankly borderless. These are the things that are in our hand that we have to start moralizing now, so that when we actually get that runway that we need in terms of, no pun intended, as far as the actual technical pieces locked in, there is a high level of interest that is built up. Because as the minister rightly says, we need those planes filled. We need those ships to move with stuff in them. But at least let's get the planes filled so that we can actually get the service industries up and running. But by no means should we allow ourselves the excuse and the mindset that we cannot get it started unless we can get on a plane and go to Africa.
Completely agree with those sentiments, Dr. Tanis. Thank you so much. We have a question here from Michael Mills, and I believe that this question is best posed to Mr. Mukete. Remember, Mr. Mukete, when you hold the purse, you get all the questions when it comes to business. We have Michael Mills again. He's founder of the CEO of Beijing 966 Rum. So he stated that we were part of the inaugural export to Ghana and have interest from distributors in Kenya, United Kingdom, and the USA. We are looking to raise equity capital to expand into these markets. He asked which is the best entity on this call to help facilitate an equity capital raise. I don't know if Minister you want that, but I would assume that this would be Mr. Mukete, who represents the Afro-Exim Bank. But panelists, feel free to share any additional information after Mr. Mukete has responded, because you may have also information that Mr. Mills could use as he looks to raise this venture capital, this equity capital, to expand distribution into Kenya, United Kingdom, and USA. And let me just say congratulations, Mr. Mills, on this very, very important step. Mr. Mukete?
Yes, congratulations to the gentleman. It's an impressive feat. And we actually have a private equity subsidiary that will be launching a venture capital fund next year, right? So typically, our private equity fund called the Fund for Export Development of Africa has been in operation for the last 5 years. And as a private equity institution, it's primarily focused on sort of more mature opportunities for companies that have operating cash flows, and which I believe, based on what the gentleman has explained, it could fit that profile. But we also will be launching a venture fund that focuses more on early stage opportunities. So virgin opportunities such as the creative industries on the continent and in the diaspora as well. So that is the Fund for Exports Development for Africa. The gentleman can look it up. They have an email online where I believe people can provide submissions with the decks of what exactly they're looking for. And I know that they're very responsive. So I'm also happy to give them an alert if they want to send it back.
Thank you, Mr. Mukete, for that information. We have Alessandro. I'm so sorry to do this too, but I'm just not going to call the last name. But Alessandro, whose hand is raised in the chat, and he is a Barbadian citizen of Italian heritage, and he has a question which he'll pose right now. Go ahead, Alessandro.
Hello. Good
Yes,
morning.
Alessandro, can you hear us? Please go right ahead.
Yeah, okay, wonderful. Good morning to everybody. Thank you for letting me participating. Actually, I think this panel this morning is very important because I see this is the first really this true discussion about this air link that really we need. Because till now, sure, we are now discussing, but we need to make this a reality. And I thank you, everybody in this panel. I also welcome very much the introduction of the Afrimex banks, because I think it can play a major role now finally, because since we usually depend from certain banks coming from different origin, but I don't think really we have a bank can do this this particular interest. So the Afrimex banks really can play a major role. And since long, I'm trying to work about the plan, because I think Caribbean is only 5.5 hours to Senegal to fly. And this is ridiculous what we are doing now to go to Africa, or opposite. And even this heritage must be also linked, because this is really an asset, I think. I remind this that not only Caribbean as African heritage, but all Latin America. If we think all Central America, South America, till even Uruguay, there in Ecuador, Colombia, Costa Rica, Honduras, Guatemala, even so they have all Cuba. So they are all area where there is no links with Africa. And I think it's very important what we are doing here, because maybe we could even help the rest of Latin America in link with Africa. Africa, we know there is a huge potential, and I think this is the continent in the moment with the highest level of development in the world. And Europe actually is one of the highest decline in index, thanks to the lots of things that are happening in the rest recently. So we need also to change, I think, this book finally. And I'm very happy because I live here, I'm now a citizen here. And I'm also a small micro entrepreneur. And I deal since years with import and export, and I know what does it mean. I'm actually, for example, getting some goods from Africa, but I'm getting through France, so they must go to Holland and then come here. Imagine, all this will increase the cost. So I think, for example, a plan that, like was saying the Honorable Mr. Simmons, so we need to have a viable plan. But to subside the plan, we cannot think it go over 3-5 years maximum, because then, like he was saying, it will also collapse. So in my view, I think it's very important that we have, for example, let's say 3 weekly fly in order that a airline can make viable this. Because if you don't have that, so also for the crew and lots of other expensive, then the flight will be always on lost. How to create that? I studied a lot this, and I really think that we have an issue in this, because we are, for example, we can get some African airlines flying here and then going, for example, to the west coast of for example, United States or Latin America, or from South Africa to the States, and be a stop. But I don't think this really will change much our reality. I think what really we need, because we have also, like he was saying, the Honorable Minister, we need to do what really we are talking. We need to create our carrier here, because only if we do this and we use our islands, we are a bridge. Because in the history always it worked. Why not now? You see, I am studying of a plan, and I already I submitted already to the Ministry of Tourism the honor of Minister Edgel, and I hope they will get it will get the right attention, because like was saying Ms. Pauline Airwood before, I think we can develop a lot this here better if we have a local carrier. I spoke 3 years ago with the network manager of Ethiopian Airlines, myself. And he was saying that it's difficult for African Airlines to come here, because when they arrive here, they don't have connection much. There's not much they can exchange. So the biggest problem is that we don't have here, for example, airline like Copa. We have only this small airline that flying the other islands, but we don't have, for example, an airline connecting here with Panama, Bogota, Caracas, Quito, San Jose, Mexico, Santiago de Chile, Lima. We don't have that. So this is a problem. So the African line, they can come only if they can do some business really. So do the charter, okay, could be a possibility. But I'm trying to work on this plan that could give also a plan. It is a plan not only of airline, but it's a plan for the country. Because like we was talking, and many of you, they were saying, in this country, they can open the door to many other activities for this airline. So there could be really a plan for not only for this island, but Barbados, but also the other islands in all its region. We need, for example, and what I was saying, my question was also, if there is an intention for the free movement of people and goods in CARICOM, so this could help a lot. If our, for example, government of Barbados could push this dream to be really a reality, will help a lot. Because if CARICOM move like one area that there is no, so there is no barriers, it will help also the ferry system also to start. It will have also the local regional airline to move better and to be more viable. And then we can trade easy with Africa, but also with Europe, with Latin America. So I'm trying to, I think it's very important, the Africa link. It can only start, I think, if we create a carrier, because without a carrier locally to do that job, that we are a bridge, I think, but Barbados for airport has all numbers to be a world hub. And we know that because we have one of the best runway here. And I think we have experience in years with all type of aircrafts. So I think we need just to invest a little bit more here. And I think the Afrimex banks, it could help a lot on this. So we need
Thank
now
you,
to...
Sorry for cutting you, but we're just cognizant of the time. But I think that we got very much what you're saying. Thank you for sharing. And thank you for submitting the proposal. But I think the best person to respond will be Minister. Minister, can you respond briefly to Alessandro, his comments? He said a lot in that very, very important and invaluable information and insight.
Thank you.
Maybe you want to respond to him. You're on mute, Minister.
Any improvement now?
Much improved. Go right ahead.
Okay, fine. No, I agree with Alejandro. I am confident that the direct air link between ourselves and this region and Africa is within our grasp. Let me start by saying that it perhaps will happen sooner rather than later in the context of sometime next year. in the interim, I believe that it is important to understand that there's a very vital point that he has touched on. And this has bedeviled all of the tourism conversations that I know of. We place a lot of emphasis on getting airlift. The concept of airlift is to get a plane to leave one destination to another. What really we need to do, and where I think Barbados is positioning itself now, is building connectivity. And I think that is the very excellent point that is being made by the caller. There is a difference between airlift and connectivity. Barbados is trying to be that gateway for connectivity. We are already a major hub, or the major hub perhaps, in the Eastern Caribbean. We now wish to be that gateway to connect Africa to the Eastern Caribbean, and quite frankly, into Latin America as well. And that is why you will find that there's a policy which is trying to pull new aircraft into the region so that we broaden that hub and spoke relationship, so to speak, with Barbados being a hub. And then you're projecting into different parts of Latin America, different parts of the Caribbean, and obviously into Africa. And quite frankly, we're also working on the Middle East. That is really the strategy that is being rolled out at this particular point. But as I said, it is in some cases very heavy lifting, because you have to find partners that are adequate and make the right type of fit. The difficulty is that it is not so easy as it sounds to say we're going to get an airline out of the region to do this. Yes, we have aircraft in the region, but the aircraft have to be able to make that long haul. And equally, the aircraft have to be, we don't have any private sector entities in Barbados, in the Caribbean, that are running aircraft of that nature. So they're going to be, again, once we talk about new routes like Africa, we're talking about substantially supporting those routes financially. And that very often is where the devil now becomes part of the issue, the devil in the details, because we have to be able to find a way to financially do that. And on government budgets, it is very difficult to achieve that.
Thank you, Minister. So we've now come to the close of our question and answer segment. And what I just asked for the panelists to do now in 1 minute, if you can, just your closing remarks, your final thoughts on the way forward. A lot has been discussed today. This is very, very important information. And what we wanted to do at BCSI was to ensure that we had persons represented from very critical sectors, and of course, our minister. So I'll start now with Mr. Walters. If you can lead us off in your final thoughts and closing remarks.
Thank you. I think what I will say here is, speaking from about the region in general, the growth trajectory that I mentioned for the region continues, and we need to seriously look at the markets that we will be tapping into to continue that growth, or to continue to promote that growth. Africa presents a good opportunity for the region to be able to look at sustaining the growth that I think is necessary for us to grow our economies in a world of rising costs. It presents itself in terms of not just tourism, but travel and the attendant investment, trade, as has been discussed, and all the spin-offs from there. It is a region with growing wealth, even though I know, as the minister said, there's a challenge all around in terms of dealing with depressed economies in a lot of cases. But in terms of looking at a region that has been untapped, and from the Caribbean standpoint, Africa presents itself as a region where we can almost nearly organically increase our state. There are connections to the region, as have been discussed, the whole idea of diasporal connections, etc., cultural heritage. And therefore, it is an opportunity for us in the region to look to somewhere that we can continue what I think the WTTC is projecting at 6% growth for the region in terms of tourism overall. for the next 10 years. I think I'm quoting 10% as their top line is correct. So I think we need to develop the discussion, and certainly at the CTO, we have been looking at it, and we'll continue to look at Africa as a region for growth in our specific sector and the sectors associated linkages with tourism. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Mr. Walters. Mr. Mukete, can you please give us your final thoughts on this session this morning?
Sure. Thank you so much. Let me thank the BCSI, first of all, for putting together such an important session, and my esteemed colleagues for joining the call. I think this is very important. It's a very important and topical issue in terms of trying to create air connectivity, these linkages between the continents, between the African continent and the CARICOM region. Because the gentleman previously said, you're opening new markets for new industries in our various regions, right? The time that the time of reducing costs of us, how this is our understanding of our conviction that the more people are the more opportunity to adapt to commercial opportunities. And for us, we try to create these avenues through trade fair. Trade fair happening in Cairo, the Intra-Africa Trade Fair happening in Cairo in November, as well as the Africa Caribbean Trade and Investment Forum happening. And we hope to see as many people as we can over there.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mukete. Dr. Tanis?
Thank you, Amanda. I also want to join and congratulate the BCSI for, creating a platform yet again for an extremely, I think, engaging forum, quite informative. And I congratulate them. Of course, I need to highlight that they are a very valued member of the Barbados Private Sector Association. So I had to just put that plug in there. My final thought would be on CARICOM. And the fact that in the context of our discussion, we're talking about two regions engaging with each other, trade and facilitation and so on. I think we need to look seriously, though, at the functioning of CARICOM. And there's some housekeeping that CARICOM needs to advance if it seriously wants to really optimize its these talks and discussions in any meaningful way. We do need to look at the trade impediments within the small basin of 11 countries in CARICOM that we have. We do need to look at the harmonization and stabilization issues that we already have within this basin. Because you could imagine if we don't get those issues right and we try to then to matrix with a continent with 54 countries, it will be sheer confusion if we certainly cannot get a handle on the trade barriers that already exist in the small nexus of the Caribbean. So my challenge would be for heads of governments, CARICOM, to really rise up and essentially have a very conclusive strategy. Not that we have Africa in the region, we have the bank in the region. I think we need a heads of state type level to really sit down and try to tie and soap a lot of this, like I said, loose housekeeping within ourselves, so that when we actually reach over the bridge, we're reaching in a fairly united, comprehensive way that's very efficient to start this trading platform off.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tanis. Minister?
Let me begin by also, yes, and I will also congratulate BCSA. That's the first few seconds. Financing is perhaps the key thing in much of this. And I really want to say that I think the role that can be played by the African Exim Bank is exceptionally critical. 1.5 billion to 3 billion is a lot of money. And the truth of the matter is we need to use this new partner and this new entrant into the market space financially to assist us in building the bridges that need to be built. Last point I make is that there is, in my judgment, tremendous mutual interest on both sides of the Atlantic. there is an interest, Africa and in the Caribbean, in building this bridge. We should use technology as the tool for interconnectivity and trade. I think that is vitally important. And there are some things which are within our grasp immediately. Broadcasting can be done. Promotion of film of our music. It helps us to build that cultural familiarity and an understanding of each other in a much better way. And I think we should go full blast on that. While even as we work then to put the nuts and bolts together on the more heavy lifting, which is really what the air services would require.
Thank you, Minister. As we come to a close to this very important session, just wanted to offer my remarks and just first of all to echo sentiments of all of the panelists as it relates to this important issue, this topic. We discussed, of course, the importance of airlift, which the minister and others would have articulated and spoke to, of course, what is happening behind the scenes, the level of discussions, the heavy lifting that Minister Simmons spoke about is happening, and we're happy to hear that. And we're also very happy to hear that the Caribbean Tourism Organization and other tourism boards are fervently looking at digitization and other ways of appealing to markets, new markets, including Africa. We definitely appreciated Dr. Tanis's perspective in terms of private sector and discussion around standards, accreditation, readiness, and the importance of harnessing and leveraging opportunities now, using technology and others to start to look at how we can really penetrate the new market that is Africa. And of course, Africa Exim Bank, which is absolutely critical in terms of financing projects and capital expenditure. I don't want to say a new, but a very welcomed banking finance institution into the Caribbean. We're all very excited. And of course, the link with historically and otherwise with Africa culturally. And we're very much looking into seeing how we can leverage the capital that is now available to us. From the BCSI's perspective, these are the types of forums that we will continue to have. We see ourselves as a very important player in this market and in industry. And we as a board and as senior management have been discussing ways that we can now expand and offer greater value to our members and play our part in this very important building of our country and of course our economies. So those are my comments. I just want to end by thanking everyone. I first want to thank our panelists, Honorable Minister Carrie Simmons, Dr. Tricia Tanis, Mr. Neil Walters, and Mr. Victor Mukete for engaging us and sharing with us so much. 2 hours was not enough. And I also wanted to say that we have several questions that were posed by members of the audience who were online. We appreciate those questions and we promise to collate them and to share them with panel members via email and of course offer the feedback. I know the panelists will not mind me saying that because we weren't able to take all of the many questions that we had this morning, but we appreciate you. Thank you to Marnico Media for hosting this virtual forum. And I also want to highlight the BCSI staff led by Ms. Michelle Smith-Mears and supported by Ms. Alicia Selman. Thank you so much. And I leave my last thank yous to you, the members of the audience who joined us online and stayed the entire time, which speaks to the fact that you really took a lot from what we said this morning. So thank you so much and do have a fantastic day.